All right, Guy Sullivan. And we said it right.
Yeah, it was very good.
Hey, man, I appreciate you coming in. So for anyone that doesn't know, we actually had a lot of friends in common that we didn't really, I didn't know at the time until I met you. And then I guess we crossed paths, a few years ago? Now?
Probably about 4 or 5 years.
Is it that long ago yet now?
It feels like that.
So, which has been cool, because as soon as I found out what you were up to, I was like, man, you're you get stuff done, which is always cool, because I think there's a lot of people, I would say in the real estate space, it's full of people that talk about a lot of things. And when it comes to execution, their execution isn't doesn't live up to kind of the hype. Right. So, I think, so to give everyone some context, maybe describe kind of what you were doing when we first met,
right?
Because it was kind of interesting, the volume that you're pushing through.
Yeah. I'll actually take a step back. So Penguin Basements is a renovation company I started in 2011, started doing business in 2012. The concept was, there's twofold. One, I wanted to learn about the building envelope, because, originally I grew up in the window and door business, but that's not really getting you a full breadth of how construction works. So I wanted to do basements because I felt like I would learn all the elements of construction and then inevitably build houses and continue to grow. I've always had a passion for construction, but, like many, there's no real access to it. So so for me, what I wanted to do is learn about construction. Okay. But in the market, I was looking at, all these subdivisions being built with unfinished basements. And, people at the time were, even though the houses were cheaper, people are still having a tough time entering the market and so on and so forth. So they would, buy a house and have an unfinished basement. And 5 years later, when their first mortgage term came due and the house appreciated by, $100,000, $200,000 more, they'd be inclined to finish their basement. So we had all of these subdivisions built in the GTA, Greater Toronto Area, in the 90s and 2000s, and it was just the right place at the right time. Before we, there's a concept of jumping in the right swim lane at the right time.
Yeah.
That's really what basements were in 2011, 12.
And these weren't basement, you weren't building basement apartments.
No.
You were just finishing the basement.
No, and even our first basements, we wouldn't even sell them with washrooms. We'd refer a plumber just so we can see how it actually goes, how it fits into our walls and into our system. So, long story short, I was very ambitious. When you speak of people that talk, I don't know anybody who talked more than I did, but I had a passion to actually continue that talk. First it starts with a thought, then you talk about it, but at the end of the day, and you could sell it. But you have to find a way to, learn what you're selling better and then create systems and processes that it's actually repeatable and executable, because there's nothing worse than saying you're going to do something. Obviously, you're not the builder, you're not the framer, you're not the drywaller, you're not, what have you. And there's, people in the middle of those handoffs, and there's nothing worse than looking that person in the eye a month later or 2 months later and not being the product that you wanted. So because that really bothered me, I had to create kind of the systems and processes. And, from 2012 till about 2024, we sold over 2,000 basements. So I had to learn, how to systemize that in different geographies. And the other thing is that there's no real skilled trades that are built for such small projects, like just framing a basement. It'd be hard to contract that out. It's hard to get. So we had to build, for example, a framing crew of 6 to 9 people. And we had to create a process where we would frame every basement in a day. And the basement had to be, let's say, over 1,200 square feet for us not to be able to finish that in a day.
But you were doing volume. If you were doing you said you did 2,000 basements?
Yeah, our top year of sales was 315 basements. So in season,
how's that even? It doesn't even sound it's almost a basement a day.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Basement a day was the norm in our schedules. And again, when you're having all these subdivisions being built, the market is there to do that many basements easily. We were building in the GTA as built, on the build side, they're building over 20,000 homes a year.
So the majority of the basements were they were from builders, so they were completely unfinished.
Yeah, that was the driver in our business. And then somewhere around 2017, 2018, we started mixing in way more second suites. We were advertising basement apartments from 2014, spending a lot of our time and resources educating people on what at the time would be $1,000 or $1,200 rental. Now,
but that must have that must have changed your processes at that point, because then if you have to do that, then you're dealing with different bylaws in different places, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, there's only a marginal difference on what you have to do. Like we've always done, resilient channel, which is framing in the ceiling of the basement. So of course you have to add extra insulation. The type of drywall changes. You have to reset the water lines. So there's more pre-construction elements, and we generally get inspections on everything we do. So it wasn't that novel. Another thing that happened that was kind of like a tailwind was that there was an industry being developed of service contractors that do exterior stairs and window cutouts. When we started doing our basement apartments in 2014, that didn't exist. So we had to make deals with concrete trades, and there's only all these over-promising subcontractors, whereas now there's a market of just window cutters and just walkout.
As the demand for those, so as more people were looking at adding basement apartments, other contractors saw a demand just for those services.
Correct.
And then they just carved out their little niche doing whatever. And
it was amazing for us, because all we have to do is maybe go in and patch up their work. Maybe their railings aren't straight, or they didn't do a good parge, or we have to fix the headers on the inside. But that was easy to go in and clean up, as opposed to trying to piece together a trade or convince it, because these are effectively in construction, a basement is a micro project, right? Even if it's 50 or 100 or 125,000, whatever it is, if you're actually doing it the way that larger projects are done, you're using specialty trades for each task. It's rare for us to have, especially in the from 2016 on, it was rare for us to have one trade do two tasks. A tiler's a tiler, flooring is separate from trim. That's how our business grew. So the quality of work, I even saw it when we were early days. We'd have one main crew, so to speak, build a basement, and then on the same street we did 6 or 7 jobs. I saw in the same year when we did the trade approach, so in and out of each discipline, and then the crew, the quality was night and day. The homeowner didn't always see the difference, but I did.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, this is the way to go. We have to use the specific trades.
See, that's why when I met you and I started understanding what you were doing, I immediately looked at you as a systems guy, because I just thought, I'm like, man, to pull that off and to coordinate all the moving parts of those things,
correct,
en masse. I mean, if you don't have good systems, that blows up in your face real quick.
Exactly.
Right. So, and I guess I'd imagine if you mentioned something about you just want to be able to look the person in the eye after the job's done. So I'd imagine just one of the principles for you, based on you saying that, is just you seem to be a man of your word. You know what I mean? Your word seems very important, I would imagine. Yeah. And the reason I'm saying that is because my dad, growing up, I don't know how many lessons I remember from my dad. This one stands out, and it was just about keeping your word. I can't tell you how many times, maybe I told my dad I might cut the grass that day, and then he came home. The day wasn't over, for the record, but it might have been 7 p.m. and it probably wasn't going to be doing it that day. And I was lying on the couch, and he gave me this look, and I was like, oh crap, I better get up. And I said I was going to do that. I better get my ass out in gear and do that, So I guess it kind of for you to just say that, it just kind of is top of mind, I guess.
Yeah, I think it comes down from the fact that I have always had this ambition to create something that benefited really me to start with. I wanted to be successful. That was always an important goal of mine since I was a child. And then seeing that being successful and being ambitious required a team, required, following through.
Let me interrupt you there for a second. So what was successful to you at that time? Looking back?
It started off pretty superficially. We were a middle-class family, and so early on, being a numbers person, I just kind of I'd ask for things of my parents, as a, let's say 5, 6, 7-year-old, and they would say no. They say no because they didn't have the money. So it's just, in my mind, I always felt like money brought you some freedom, some flexibility, and didn't have to say no. I was it was almost existential. As a small child, I was it seems like money is always the reason we can't have things. So why I thought when I was young, I thought everybody was just going to be a doctor and a lawyer, because it seemed like those people would naturally be able to get what they, not be saying no as often as they would to their children or to themselves. So, I always wanted to be successful, and so it made me very driven and, a good communicator and selling and all this. But when you're selling and you're not executing, you're just overselling.
Got it.
That's the biggest problem. And so in order not to oversell, it's almost like the numerator and the common denominator. So you have to, you push the numerator, but immediately go to work and deliver. And the harder you work at delivering, the easier it's going to be to lift it and sell it. Mm-hmm. So what I really enjoyed about starting a business was that I could no longer just have to communicate my vision, but I could control the engineered solution. That's what it was.
Okay, and then I interrupted you with that question because you were talking about your team. To be successful, you thought you figured out you would need a team and that type of thing. So do you still have a train of thought there? Or did I just completely throw that out the window?
No. I mean, the reality is you need a team, because at the end of the day, my skill set is to be able to put together a vision and then make sure that it's viable and that it benefits let's say in this case, in a basement case, the consumer, the family. Like I'll get more specific. What I didn't realize when I started the basement business, I was in the mid-20s. So I thought I was building basements, but I wasn't actually building basements. I was entering into normally a young couple's family with 1.5 kids and a dog and stresses from work. And all of a sudden, if we extend this job by double, that second half, what we're not party to, no matter what they call us or email us about, is possibly nightly fights or lack of communication. Like you're stressing out these households because you didn't put in the right amount of thought and work into how to execute effectively. There's already stresses and challenges. You got 15, 20 trades. They change their mind sometimes, so there's ways to mitigate that. But we're actually supposed to get in it. Everybody thought I was so focused on getting in and out of the job quickly because, conventional wisdom would be dollars per day, profitability. No, it was all about limiting the interference on their lives. Like we went through a process of putting bins on people's driveways as an example. And that allowed our trades to throw the garbage in there and whatever, get out. But the problem is if you took too long on the job site, you now affected their parking. If it snowed or rained, they're going to get into an argument. Who's giving up their parking spot? All kinds of problems. So we moved to a different system simply because, if you did extend past the time limits or even within it, so we would pick up the garbage, we would bag it, it would cost like about the same, maybe a bit more, but the interference in people's lives was less. So like we've had this conversation before about business, but if you change the focus from yourself to the consumer and kind of just figure out like why you exist, because every business is just solving problems, it makes the business so much easier. Just entirely easier when you're like, I exist because you have a problem that you may or may not know there's a solution to.
Yeah, you're right. I agree. And I guess I'm pausing because you say it so matter-of-factly and like it's common knowledge, but yet it feels like when you speak to most people, they don't feel that that's how most businesses operate, or that isn't taken into account.
Well, it's the next level. So the first level is existential. You got to break even. You got to make money. You got to pay your rent or whatever the case may be. But like, if I look at the history of my career as an entrepreneur, the most successful I've ever been is when I've always looked at where we fit in the marketplace. When you do a SWOT analysis, when you do a market analysis, whatever you do, you're really just seeing, okay, what are the missing opportunities? And often for a good business, you're meeting the client in the future. So it's not so much what was today, it's what's going to be tomorrow and how does that fit in? So, like I said, anything that is based on like profitability or, my own interests or whatever the case, you might have a good year. But it's difficult to have a longevity to that model. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to see out ahead beyond the horizon unless you're just like, okay, well, I can give you some iterations in terms of the basement business, what we did in the past to go with the market. I can give you a good example.
Sure.
So this is about maybe 2018. I had a sales meeting and I had like 9 salespeople for a basement business. It's kind of ridiculous.
Well, yeah, if you're doing 300 a year is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a lot of quoting. So, with our closing ratio, to give you an example, we're probably doing about 1,000 quotes. And so, in the house and whatever the case may be, largely evenings and weekends, you have to have a rotation, some competition, whatever. So there's about 9 of them. And I said to them, okay, how many of you that are currently selling basements on a regular basis would have us build your basement? And I always encouraged honesty, and no hand ran up. I said, so you're selling these basements, but you wouldn't buy one yourself. So I said, no problem. I love it. Why? They raised their hands and they said, well, at least half of them said, well, because we could do it ourselves. I said, so okay, that makes sense. So you believe that you're entitled or in business to sell something because you're effectively like a mechanic. You don't need to, buy a new car or have it serviced by somebody else. Makes sense. So then I thought about it, and I said, almost immediately, I realized, all right, well, what services do you feel like you could do? Because you're clearly not electricians or plumbers. And, I know, looking at middle-aged, out-of-shape men, largely, they're not going to be good framers. They're not going to be good drywallers.
Yeah.
They might think they are in their minds, but they're not. And they're not good tapers for sure. So then I realized, okay, if many homeowners feel this way, why don't we iterate our business and move towards doing basements up to a taped state? So don't paint it. Lots of homeowners would say, I could do my basement, but I think I would paint it, but I'm not, whatever their argument.
Painting and flooring seems like, oh yeah, that's easy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
At least seems like. And of course it's going to take.
That's why I said seems like.
Exactly. Of course it's going to take more time, and you can YouTube and call a friend, but if there's a good cost savings. Anyways, so we went out and started promoting a basement that was to a taped state. So you do your own flooring, trim, and paint, wrap it all together, and go at your own pace, and whatever the case may be. It allowed us to drop the price by 40%. It also, what I did was I didn't only take the hard costs off, I took all the soft costs off. Because if you're only going to a taped state, you really don't need supervision, because you have a drawing. If you're framing, electrical, plumbing, all the rough-ends are in the right place. Further to that, I went from a consumer perspective. I said, a customer may be able to drop a toilet, or somebody that's handy, and maybe connect the vanity, but I don't feel comfortable with them doing the shower, the base, the glass, the silicone, or the tile. Yeah. Just in my mind. So our tape state is, if you bought a washroom, it came with the package with the shower, unless you could prove to us that there's a qualified person to finish it. So that approach, as we went through COVID and the market got a little tighter, the appreciation in real estate didn't go up, it ended up being like 50% of our business. It was like an implicit deal. So if you're just focused, I don't want to sound like we're Amazon, but if you're just focused on where you think you're going to meet the customer in the future and what their real needs are, their perceptive needs, then you can make a better deal with them.
Hey everyone, before we get back to the podcast, I've got a quick plug for our weekly Tuesday email update. Every Tuesday, we send out a short and actionable email sharing 3 things the Rockstar team is focused on that week. We dive into the latest data, news, or a chart on the real estate market that's caught our attention, and we give our take on what it means for Canadians. We also share one of our most popular pieces of content, something that's really struck a chord with our community. Plus, we often offer free training classes, special events, live streams, and one-off classes for investors. It's a great way to stay on top of new strategies and learn from our experts without spending a dime. If you want all the insights, upcoming events, and some behind-the-scenes fun, sign up for our weekly Tuesday email update for free today. Sign up now at rockstarinnercircle.com/getstarted and never miss an update. That's rockstarinnercircle.com/getstarted to level up your investing.
Yeah, it's like any business, I guess. Like when you just rest on what you've been doing and you don't try to iterate, or in this example, almost like compete with yourself.
Yeah,
really
cannibalize your sales.
Yeah, then it's you become stale.
Correct.
And it's the way we've had to look at things here too. And we've changed some stuff. Are we perfect at it? No, but we've been around in this space. If you look at like the real estate investing space, we've been around it makes you sound old, but we've been around a long time now, and there's a lot of things.
Go ahead, say how many years.
Come and gone, So yeah, I don't even know. I always tell people, I think it's 16, 17. If I had to go back, I think we're actually 17, 18 now or something.
Right.
But it's been a while, and there's a lot of things that have come and gone. And for some reason, I guess we've managed to stick around. We have we have principles that we live by, I think, and then I think that's given people some. And then because we've been around for so long, it's given people some comfort that we're just not this kind of fly by night operation. Similar to you when you're doing volume, and then there's word of mouth that goes, I'm sure, from one customer to the next, and that type of stuff. But if you are running that business, and I want to get onto what you're doing now, but I just want to ask something, because if you're running a basement business with 9 sales guys selling basements, you're basically, someone's the marketer, because you're generating to be able to do that and enough leads to then book the appointments and to get the guys there to do the quotes. You're also, there's a marketing arm that's feeding those 9 guys, and it's not an easy task to feed nine guys a number of leads for basements.
No, it's not. So what we would do is we had a marketing team, 3 people.
In-house?
In-house.
Okay.
plus third-party marketers like that would handle your SEO, AdWords. That wasn't even included. And so they'd produce content and what have you. And then we had like a small inbound call center that would screen the leads. I'll give you an example. In our heyday, we would get over 100 leads a week. So the strategy behind that was not so much about how many leads we would get, but we have to carefully navigate the conversations with the homeowners to be able to decipher, a good lead from a bad lead. But also, I didn't always believe that there's a good or bad lead. There was a conversation to be had, whether it was 10 minutes or an hour. Literally, that was the range of our calls, and sometimes more than an hour, to get them comfortable with the work itself, with the budgets, with whatever. Because if the customer, the theoretical customer, is comfortable with what it's going to cost, the timelines, and kind of can visualize it coming together as a solution, they become a customer, and they weren't otherwise. The other good example is like, if you were going to take the cost of the renovation, and already a good question we used to ask is, if you take the cost of the renovation, call it $70,000, and that was already included in the purchase price of the asset that you bought, the house you live in, would you have preferred it? And if they said yes, it just tells you that they're concerned about price variances, dirt and debris in their home, over-promising. So if you can bridge that gap, you're creating customers. So the key was, of the 100 calls, making sure that we had value-driven conversations, and we really focused on not, rushing people off the phone or discounting their interests as much as possible.
Yeah, one thing we always talk about here with our team, like early on, especially, as our team was growing and they hadn't had the experience, when they're first starting, is understanding what the underlying problem is. And I know we're kind of talking to business stuff, but everyone's like, well, they're saying, they don't like this. I'm like, well, okay, well, why don't they like that? And, they would give a reason. I'm like, well, why is that the reason? And like, and it sounds weird. It almost sounds like just like you're sitting in like a psychologist's office or something. But if you really drill down into it and you get to understand what's really going on, and like you said, then you can bridge that gap. And a lot of people aren't able to kind of piece that one. They're not able to piece that stuff together because they just take the surface level objection and they just don't look any deeper. But so where did you, so if you're leading all these different departments, like where the hell did you learn all this stuff? Like, what did you do? Like, what is it, personal development? Like, okay, hold up. This is 2014. So you were what, in your late 20s when you started this?
No, I started this in 2011. I registered the company, so I was 26 at the time.
So yeah, so where did you, like, was it just trial and error for you? Like, where did you start learn? Because between trying to understand the renovation side of stuff and then trying to understand all the different systems involved and then trying to manage crews and then trying to do marketing and inbound sales center, like a call center, where did it all come from?
That's a good question. Look, I think when you make a choice to enter this arena and you make a choice to come out the other side, you just figure it out. And, I can give you typical entrepreneurial stories, but some of them seem like exaggerations. But, I would lease my vehicles accordingly to be able to sleep in the car. I have stories about, I remember, one time I was in my driveway. I bought a house in Vaughan, and I was in my driveway and I was staring at my house, and I realized that the bricks and the stones, essentially, so we have like a little stone veneer and some brick, and I look at the front of my house and I realize, wow, the bricks are more pink than I remember them to be. Like, I thought they were more red. And I thought to myself, like, why is that occurring to me now? And then I thought back and I didn't remember seeing my house in the daylight.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe a couple years of not seeing my house in the daylight. So I'm used to, because especially early days in the business, like grinding through it, even if you show up late to the office relative to construction, 8 o'clock in the morning, I would do the appointments at night. So 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock, or, whatever, sometimes just one appointment. But if you live in Vaughan and your appointment's in Oakville, you could be 7 o'clock appointment, you're not home till 11, and you rinse and repeat that over and over again. And then, in those meetings too, like I would have to do Saturday and Sunday appointments as well, because that's when people were home. So from my first business was in windows and doors and basements. I literally, from 2012 to 2020 probably, I was at least 6.5 days a week, if not 7.
Yeah.
It was just will and determination.
And yeah, you hear that a lot. I mean, credit to you for doing it, because it's not easy when you're doing that nonstop for that period of time. what happened to how was your health during that time? Were you still young enough that it didn't impact you so much, or did you notice a difference?
I was
like, were you working out and that type of thing at that time?
Not as much, no. So what would happen, I started working out. So I worked out before my business in my early 20s, and then I picked it back up in like my early 30s. And so there's a gap there. And at the same time, like, it was super stressful. You always feel like you're losing. You're winning for seldomly, a little celebration, and then you're losing again. Because you're always trying to improve it, or you're growing and there's new problems, whatever. So I think what I did was, I'd go out on the weekends, and I realized that that's a problem. Like, going out on the weekends is a problem.
Because it got in the way of work? For
sure. And like drinking in general, or any other, anything else is like, there's no, that's the part of my life that I, look back on. And I think it was very necessary. There's a time in my life to party in my 20s and whatever. But
yeah, we all have those periods where you got to get a little bit of stuff out of your system.
Right. But the way that I did it, I would go out and party, like, I would take all my stresses from the week and release it, let's say, on Saturday night, and have a good time with my friends. But it wasn't healthy, especially since, so yeah, I mean, that's.
Yeah. No, I got it. And that still happens. I mean, today, I actually just recently this year, I started to make changes just like alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was just literally like just a few days of the week. It wasn't like I was really heavy drinking, but I was just like, you know what? I just want to make these certain days of the week. And it's right. I started with Monday to Wednesday. It's kind of expanded to Monday to Thursday, just out of habit, not like I was even trying to. And just like, I just want to make a point of, I'm not going to drink those days. That's it. And I have, like, when we've been on vacation for a week and like, we're down south someplace, that's different. But while I've been here, I haven't. So it's been those days of just, nope. And so that allows me to still go out for dinner with my wife and stuff, and have a glass of wine Friday, Saturday, if we're celebrating something on a Sunday afternoon. But just for whatever reason, I'm just like, you know what? I don't even think it was really impacting my life. I just wanted to do it. And you notice it's almost just like, sometimes you do that type of stuff, there's a reason, and then sometimes it's just kind of to prove to yourself, like, yeah, I just can because I want to.
And you're in control.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it was, so going back to the business, like when COVID first hit, I always had this in the back of my mind that we were going to pivot to selling blinds and closets. Because I just thought, like, a $5,000, $10,000 transaction was going to build rapport with the client, and then we're going to get the basement in the future. Kind of if you follow the sequence of how people buy tract homes, like subdivision homes, they need the basics, and then they'll do the rest when their mortgage renews. Anyways, so a couple months into COVID, I realized, oh my God, these consumers are used to working online now. They might buy online, especially put in a deposit and sign an e-signature. Like, I think for most of us, if we look back before COVID, that was unheard of, especially if the transaction was sizable. Anyways, so when I realized that everybody would buy virtually, and normally with sales and staff, you get some attrition, you get some turnover. What I did was I changed our business model to go completely virtual. So if you'd call in and ask for an appointment, we would send basically a drafts person to draft the existing basement and do a 360 virtual tour, which at the time was a novel concept 5 years ago. To do a virtual tour, send a CAD drawing in and out of the house, the virtual tour, and then we started selling virtually. So as I pared down my salespeople, inevitably I ended up with 3 salespeople, 2 salespeople, and then 1 salesperson could handle it all. Not to mention, we serviced, an office in Ottawa, Toronto, Barrie, Cambridge. Like, we serviced a significant part of the province, and we did that with minimal to no supervision. So what we would do is that we have our own trades for the most part, and we would, like, employed, and then they would do their own 360 Matterport at the end of the day. So if the customer called in that night or the next morning, not only do we have the electronic Gantt schedule that tells us what's going on every day, if they wanted to address something, we can go to that space with them right over the phone. Mm-hmm. So I'd have basically one coordinator project manager. Inevitably, we evolved to having one coordinator project manager, one salesperson, and you could still do hundreds of renos. And
how competitive of a person are you?
Pretty competitive, I would say.
Yeah, and the reason I'm asking is just because it sounds like it's out of the blue, but I'm just like, it felt like it's like you can't stay still with something for too long, because you're like, I have to make it better. So whether it's you making yourself better or you making your business better, it's like you just want it's not necessarily more. I think it's just better. Is that right? Am I saying that right or no?
Kind of. I think for me, what I've come to realize, and I'll talk about how the productivity and efficiency has affected my personal life, but the way I view things now is that I'm trying, I think we all have a concept of, or we have to deal with our existential, like this life is finite. And to me, I've always been kind of defaulted to being really grateful. I know how short our life is and whatever the case may be. I think that as you strive for more, it's not so much consumption, it's not so much personal success, whatever. I actually, I'm very spiritual. I feel like I have a good relationship with God. And I think about, what in an infinite world, me being simple and finite, what would they want me to do? Well, like, what would God want me to do? They want me to serve people. It makes it very easy. So the harder I work at this, infinite goal of, call it success, wealth, whatever you want to call it, help me, you end up finding out more about yourself. You're becoming a better person. You're becoming sharper. There's no direct path to becoming in my mind, like just a better person. So I think if you use business as a mechanism to help others to find out where you fit in this world, that journey is really, really all what I'm focused on and what I get back. So by driving yourself physically, the way I'm sure we might touch on, you become a better person. You become more helpful to others. You become more empathetic in certain ways. Like,
well, so explain that to me. So touch on it. What do you mean driving yourself physically? So you go to the, I mean, it's primarily CrossFit. Is it running too though, right?
Yeah. So what happened was through COVID, I kind of was just hyper vigilant and hyper focused on efficiency in the business. And I was looking at some of my choices and, I wasn't a huge drinker, but, I partied. And then and obviously at that point I was already barely drinking, but I thought to myself, what else can I make efficient in my own life? And so maybe about 3 years ago, it's probably at least 3 years now, I haven't drank a sip of alcohol.
Yeah, good for you.
Yeah, thank you. And recently, for example, I almost don't eat out. I have like meal preps and whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I'd say it's good for you with that too. I think that's to me a huge thing.
Yeah, no, it is.
Especially when you're busy.
Yeah, exactly. A meal, like it's me in the air fryer, and then I eat for 5-10 minutes and I continue. But there's that, and then I started waking up early. So I wake up, 4:35 in the morning.
And you weren't before?
No, because
you were working so late.
Correct.
Yeah, I gotcha.
So now that I'm not selling or managing a sales team or dealing with consumers in the evening, because we do real estate development, so it's a completely different ball game. So I wake up early. I go to CrossFit usually in the morning. The class I try to hit as much as I can is 5:30 in the morning, ends at 6:30, and I have calls at 7. So I'll do probably about 5 classes a week, including the weekends, and then I try to get in about 3 to 5 runs right now.
How long are the runs? Are they
just 5K?
Okay.
I find like there's no injuries, no strain at that distance.
Yeah.
It's more enjoyable. And then recently I've been doing a bit of martial arts, and so I find that and stretch as much as we can because we're not getting any younger. But the more fitness I can fit into my schedule, the better off I am overall. Mm-hmm. So that's all part of my efficiency. I drive as minimally as I can. I go to sites, but I go to sites for what I need to go for, and then I go back to my desk and I make things. I try to keep everything right in front of me on the screens. But yeah, like I think that my personal life drives my business life and vice versa.
I think that's fair. I think they can work together. Like people talk about this like work-life balance, and it's like, oh, well, you're doing this. It's almost like you just have to prioritize. It's all one, and you just prioritize what's important. Is the way I kind of look at it. So for me, I'm similar to you in that way for the gym in the morning. And I find it's like almost like a form of meditation for me. Like I can think more clearly. Like I'm just in a more calm state. If I don't go to the gym, sometimes the odd time, I guess, like Sundays is the one day that I don't. It's closed. So I'll usually go for a bike ride or something.
Right.
But my wife would be like, "Oh man, you're really like amped up today. Like, just go to the gym." Like, because it's just this release for me. And I think you just your body gets used to being able to use its energy.
Correct.
And otherwise, I don't know if you just don't end up having the energy, or it disappears. You just waste it on other stuff. I don't know which one it is, but it's made such a difference. And then eating out for me is one thing. Like I will do it. I just prefer not to. Any chance I get, if I don't have to, even when, if I'm on the road and I have to eat someplace, I will generally try to stop at a grocery store for lunch versus going to some sort of restaurant. And because I just find, like, if they have a hot table at a grocery store, usually for me, my experience, the quality of food has generally been better than what I'm getting at a restaurant. You know what I mean? So, it's little things like that I find make a big difference, but it all just kind of meshes together. And it's not just this like work thing or personal thing. And I have these personal beliefs. So that's what I do. It's just life. It's just your habits, it's your rituals that make all the difference in however you want to operate.
Yeah, I think it's so much so that it's about creating processes. Again, kind of sounds like work, but at this stage of life, I find that I kind of have to know where my weaknesses are and mitigate them. I'm not going to change as much as I could have changed maybe 20 years ago. Yeah. So in the meal preps, there's a lot of reasons I do that, but I get delivered food every second day. It's in containers and whatever the case, reusable. And that's the way I do it. I mean, I'm not going to learn to be an expert chef now. I'm not going to change my frequency from focusing on such like being as productive as I can be to like taking an hour and a half out of my day and what have you.
But isn't that just a priority for you? Like you could learn to be the expert chef if you want to. You're just like, hey, look, I'm working on these other businesses. Right. And so that's the priority for me. So I'm not going to prioritize this thing. Like eating healthy is still the priority. Right. I've just found another way to do it that doesn't involve me having to prep the food.
Right. Well, there's two parts of this. One is it's hard to change your frequency. So if you're thinking fast and you're moving fast and you're doing all that, I find it's, for some people, they enjoy cooking as an example, and that's cool. But let's just assume you don't, for the sake of argument. How do you go fast and go slow? The mind doesn't always work that way. So, and the other thing is being unapologetic for your weaknesses. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't feel bad about the fact that I didn't learn to be an adult and cook for myself properly, right? Because like if you talk to, your parents or that generation, they're like, what's wrong with you? Like, But this is what's wrong with me. What's wrong with me is we're extreme in what we do. We cater to our strengths. We're serving the people to the best we can. And so sometimes you have to understand where your weaknesses are and see if you can design a lifestyle that mitigates that. Yeah. That's really how I see it.
And the fitness fits in. Where's the fitness fit in for you? Is it just like to keep you in shape, to give you more energy, to give you mental clarity? Like
mental clarity. I don't think there's a way. Like I don't go to the gym, look at the mirror, and do one bicep curl. I could care less. Yeah. So I think everything's about being. In order for me to achieve what I have in my mind as our goals, right? I have to be the best version of myself possible. And if I cheat myself, it's just not going to work. So you basically, when you talk about balance, you want to be this. Whatever those numbers are behind, like, building this many buildings and this much square footage, then you're going to need to be something that you're not today. And you're going to have to be a better version of yourself. Yeah. And that's what I'm constantly working on.
Yeah, that's what I found too. It's nice to be able to, I feel like if there's no goals anywhere, if you're not shooting for something, you're just you're missing out in some.
You're not growing.
Yeah, like, and it can be personal, it can be business, but it can be personal too. And just something as simple as the gym. So leading up to my surgery, I wasn't doing as much because there was a couple. I think at the first vacation was end of January. I had another one in March, so they were kind of close together. So I'm like, I'm not going to start like a cycle of trying to really focus on something now because there's not much time. Then I have this surgery after, and I'm just going through the paces, and it kind of sucks. It doesn't suck, but it's just like, I feel like there's something missing. Whereas in the past, I would always pick something, whatever was a goal, whether it was a certain snatch weight or one time it was mobility because my handstand push-up sucked because of my mobility. Right. And I was just like, man, I would get pissed off enough that I'm like, I want to make this better. And then I was still doing all the other stuff, but then it gave me one thing to focus on and like a measuring stick. And it just keeps things interesting. Otherwise I feel like you're just going through the paces without really like, I don't know, just there's a depth that is missing. And I don't know if that's me because I'm maybe competitive with myself, maybe similar to you, like I want to be improving, or if that's just kind of something I've grown accustomed to because we've had a business for so long and we're tracking things and wanting to make it better. I don't know really where it comes from, but I feel it's a beneficial thing. At least for me, I actually enjoy it.
Yeah, for me, growing up, I was commonly the smallest kid in the grade, if not one of the smallest. I didn't have a lot of muscle mass until I went to university. I think probably the majority of my puberty was like first and second year university. Yeah. So I was late to the game. And so I never saw myself as like a strong individual. I knew I could run. Fitness was a thing where I could just like endure pain. So I would run a lot, as much as really my mind would allow me to. But I was never fit. And so one of the things I enjoy about fitness is that you can reinvent yourself. People see me today as the fit person.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, we create that. We create that through consistency and through our, through prioritizing that.
Yeah. What about, I want to talk about what you're up to now, because this is interesting, and I know we spend a lot of time on other stuff, but
stay as long as you need.
Well, it gives really good context of how you're able to kind of transfer what you were doing into what you're doing now. Because now you're not doing so many, well, like you said earlier, before we started recording, you said you kind of hung up the jersey. So the basement jersey is hung up. So now you're focused on, well, maybe you explain it. What are you focused on now? Because this is, to me, this is a really interesting segment of the market that I don't think a lot of people have kind of identified and are trying to drill down into.
Yeah. So, in terms of hanging up the jersey, for example, it might be temporary, might be long-term, but right now the market, just kind of the economic environment, firstly, there's not a lot of new builds being built, so there's not a lot to follow behind. But whether it's...
I thought the government was going to come build all these homes and solve every problem.
That's in the future.
Oh, that's in the future. I thought they started promising that for a couple of years. No?
Well, yeah, exactly. Okay. But there's that. There's condo renos. There's lots of renos to do. But my view has always been like I can really only focus on one thing at a time. And for us to be good, we have to be, we have to be focused. So what I saw was, let's say if we go back 10 years, 15 years, the only way to be in my mind, a successful builder is you go through the subdivision model and the pre-sales and what have you. But, all of a sudden you need to raise capital and have a lot of land, and you're one environmental assessment away from going bankrupt at all times, right? So, and especially in the Greater Toronto area, maybe on the peripheries you can buy smaller lots, but here it was quite difficult to.
If you're on large scale, if you're doing infill projects, maybe like.
But there weren't a lot of infill projects, and then pre-selling an infill project it's very rare as a new builder.
Yeah.
So the risk model before was different. So what I saw was now, so my first foray into building new and retrofitting for our own assets under management and pivoting away from renos was building, the garden homes, these garden homes and ADUs that became popular in the last 3 years. When I looked at a garden home, which at the time the bylaws pretty much in every municipality that approved them would be single story, 600, 700, 800 square feet, whatever it is, homes in the backyard. And I said to myself, well, what would be the best single story product? What's the highest and best use for society as a whole? And I said, well, that just sounds like it's accessible. If we can make it accessible, then, seems like a missing market. So
when you say accessible, are you talking for people with, is this for anyone with physical disabilities? Is this more is it like seniors? Because often, and I'm saying seniors because often as you age, you have more disability injuries.
Yeah, you could have a slip and fall.
Yeah. So is it geared?
So at the time I thought I was servicing both people with disabilities and seniors. But again, just creating one garden home in a backyard and then potentially renting out the main home to, traditional occupants, was my first thought. But then I realized, no, the whole lot needs to be graded, at the right percentages, and there's other considerations around that. So I said, well, maybe the whole property has to be accessible. And so what I would do is I'd buy...
the whole property has to be graded at the right percentages for it to be accessible.
Accessible, yeah.
Gotcha, okay.
And just service providers coming in and stuff, there would be some efficiencies. So what we looked at and realized is on a wartime bungalow, that side door can be reframed and refitted and expanded, and you could build that into being an elevator shaft going up and down. So we designed a top floor, bottom floor, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom each. So it'd be 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, but 2 separate apartments, plus a garden home, so 3 total, 6 bedrooms on the site. We designed that type of system into this wartime bungalow of repurposing these assets in Hamilton. We did 5 separate properties for 15 apartments.
So there were 3 beds up, 2 beds down.
2 up, 2 down, 2 up, 2 down, and 2 in the backyard.
Okay.
Yeah, so 6 beds in total. It worked out to be 5 bathrooms, 1 bathroom in the ADU, 2 bathrooms in each of the suites in the main house.
And people would rent the suite in its entirety, or they would be renting a room in the...
No, so we have 2 types of tenants. One is people that would rent the entire suite in its entirety, and others, we have a service provider that provides care on the property. They're 3 independent addresses, so that has some benefit to them in terms of regulatory. And then they come in and do services like PSWs and nurses and whatever their business is. So it's such a versatile type of structure and design. So we've created standards in the industry in the last 2.5 years. We're part of ULI and the Accessibility Coalition. And essentially, my focus in that space, like as we produce this product, it was great. It's all rented, what have you. But we learned so many great principles behind the designing of a washroom, getting in and out of the unit, the supply chain of where to buy these components, these accessories. So, for example, you could buy an accessory locally through this current supply chain 8 times more than buying it overseas and delivered. 8 times. So something that costs $800 costs you $100.
Yeah.
So you put all those accessories all over the kitchen and the cabinets. And that's what our units do. You could roll under the sink, you could roll under the stove. And we created standards that some of the biggest builders have asked for, Mattamy and Daniels Group and whatever. And those developers are now hopefully instituting that into their products. But the reality is that business is only so scalable. There's kind of like an interesting relationship between, consolidating an asset, consolidating a property to make it accessible, but you can only still have 6 beds, 7, 8, 9, doesn't matter. It's no retirement home and no care facility has that few beds and providing, efficient care.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge. Plus, to get fresh air, we do have independent outdoor spaces that are accessible even from the lower area, upper area, what have you. But there's some challenges overall with the model. So then what we did was not only did we produce those assets and created standards, but we now pivoted to more traditional rentals as well, which started off by retrofitting existing wartime bungalows. And now what we do, which is really interesting, is that we do new construction. And because we started new construction and, I haven't built a big structure before, it actually allowed us to kind of use some of the same concepts from basements, but yet adapt them to our builds.
Well, like you said, other than being a larger project, a lot of the principles are kind of the same.
Correct.
There's a few more trades needed for different, for different things. Like if you're pouring a foundation, that's something you wouldn't do with a basement. Obviously, it's done. But I just mean, it's kind of like if you're the systems guy that can build that type of stuff, morphing it to fit that doesn't seem like
doesn't seem impossible. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what it is. And the reality is you have to run through a few iterations of the construction cycle to see which trades are on board, which are inspired, where are their pressure points.
Got it, yeah.
Because usually you'd have, let's say, an owner, then an operations person, general manager, coordinator, whatever you want to call it, and then they're relying on their field person. So you could be inspiring the owner. They don't give a shit. Right? They're not really concerned about what ends up happening. They might be inspired for the lunch meeting and then it doesn't trickle down and there's no incentive structure underneath.
Yeah. So
by running some iterations of new builds, we get to see where the pressure points are for success within that operation. Do we need to incentivize the workers on site with some lunch? Like where exactly are the pieces? But what I find in construction in general is, and this is probably widely known, but everybody works in their own silos completely, especially as you get to bigger sites. Inclusive of that is even the office people. You'd think like a mechanical engineer rarely knows the electrical, rarely cares for the plumbing, rarely cares for design or architecture. So there's so many inefficiencies in construction, both in the office and in the field, that there's such a greater opportunity of consolidation and standardization. So looking back on it, everything that I learned in basements, I've kind of adopted and adapted here, and we're innovating. Yeah, so I could talk about that.
Yeah, well, if and we will, but I remember when I was working, my dad had us on condo sites when we were, because he had a drywall business. So
cool.
I don't know when. I guess I was in grade 8. I think the first time I started working for my dad. I don't know. So that's some child labor laws against that. But anyways,
not if they don't pay you.
Yeah, so
it's training.
But I remember some guys would come by to the trades not working together. If they needed work done and something was done, they would just rip out someone else's work because if no one was around, they would just do the damage. Like, well, I had to get my job done, so screw you. They didn't care.
Exactly.
You know, and it doesn't work out that way. And I want to hear about the efficiencies, but give me 1 second. I just want to paint a picture for everyone. So on these wartime bungalows that you've done, the retrofit ones.
Correct.
So you come into where the side door would be on the driveway, and you walk into that side door, and then there's just
it's an elevator shaft.
So it's an elevator shaft to go. So there's 3 stops, because those wartime bungalows, usually there's a few steps up and a few steps down.
Correct. So 3 stops technically. The entrance off the driveway is at grade, up 3, 4, down 6, 7.
And then someone does that, and then there's doors there for their
correct
unit.
And they have independent keys.
Okay, and the ADU, they can just, obviously it's accessible because it's ground level, so they can get in that way.
And the basement unit would have its own separate walkout. Like we blew it open for like 200 square foot patio.
So if they wanted directly in there, if they didn't need to use the elevator, then they could use that.
Yeah, or if they use the elevator to get in, they could actually access the outside no matter their condition.
Okay.
And then they could, host, barbecue, whatever the case may be. They have their own dedicated space.
And what about interior? Like, did you have to use the elevator?
No, you could use the stairs. You can use the stair. Each unit has its own accessible stairs. Like, it's just a different slope.
Got it.
But if you go on our website, penguinliving.com, you can actually do a virtual tour of the site and see some of the assets. So like in photos and stuff like that. But you can actually do a virtual tour and navigate the sites to see all the features. We also have like a PowerPoint presentation we've presented a couple times to the ULI, Urban Land Institute. So when we get requests from anyone, we just email that out, and they can follow our design principles and see where we bought our products.
Yeah. It's cool you're sharing that. It's actually, I didn't know that about you. You're kind of you definitely are in some ways creating standards in this place, because we get there's so much talk now, there wasn't just a few years ago, but about the missing middle, right? And we need these units, we need slightly bigger units for families and stuff, and we do, but there's no talk about the accessible units. Right. And there's for anyone that's looked for, if they have someone that needs an accessible housing unit, I'm thinking senior specifically, just because of some things that went on with my grandmother. There's just nothing was available. Of course. There's just no supply of these types of things. So it's a whole different segment of the market. And then what I'm curious about is, investors, developers in real estate, the last few years, they've been looked at kind of a little bit evil by some people. They're like, oh, they're price gouging. Oh, the investors are the problems. But I see this and I'm like, well, no, hold on. This is like what there's investors and developers like yourself that are offering good housing units and they're solving a need that communities have, that the government or other people aren't stepping in. So you're solving a problem. And I don't understand, why?
There's more than that, right? So sorry to interject, but so in the presentation to the other large-scale developers that are in the room and government officials and whatever the case may be, my strict focus was to build accessibility. And I can touch on it a little bit, but
go.
But we're trying to drive not only accessibility, but get to a delta cost of as close to zero as possible.
Got it.
So, and then really understanding misconceptions, because you can be in a room full of people that mean well, but if you don't understand the costs associated, what you could do with the designs and all these kinds of things, and all the things that we've been able to evolve into, it always just seems like it's more expensive. When you look at, I'll give you a specific, a couple of examples. So what makes an accessible washroom? I mean, really, at the end of the day, you need a transfer area and you need a curbless shower. There's way more to it, but you need a curbless shower and you need a transfer area. So we have 4 or 5 different washroom designs that can be copied and pasted to appropriate. With a kitchen, you have to roll under the sink, you have to roll under the stove, and just assume, just for the sake of argument, at 48 inches, again, might not be exactly to every standard, but at 48 inches is max reach for somebody in a chair. So the hardware and the shelves have to fold down, so on and so forth. So what we wanted to do was show everybody, look, there's a delta cost in building a kitchen where you could roll under, because it actually comes in 3 separate sections. There's a delta cost in the shower, but the plugs, the lighting, the contrasting colors for visual impairment, it shouldn't cost more. And so as we drove that out there, our goal is not to patent anything. Our goal is not to hoard any information. At the end of the day, as I said from the beginning, if our goal is strictly on how we can help, how we can have a net positive, in the end, economically, things will work their way through.
But you're not because and I understand your thinking, and I agree with it. But there's a lot of people that wouldn't be there, that would come to mind first because they're like, oh, I might have a good idea here. I got to protect this. I can't share this with people, or that would be unwise to share it with people.
Right.
Why are you thinking differently?
Well, I think there's a time and place for everything, right? I'm not just going to say I figure something out and then tomorrow I blast it online. But I was told I interviewed somebody about a week ago, and they said, you should patent your process. And I said, why would I patent my process? Well, they say, because then you can own your process. And I said, okay, and what's the benefit of that? They go, well, other people can't copy you. But I'm like, I want people to copy me. Like, why would you want that? I'm like, at the end of the day, if we're going to solve a housing crisis, the only way I can figure out how to solve a housing crisis is by oversupplying the market. That's it. So if we could oversupply the market, if I'm a party to that, whether I'm leading it, in the pack, whatever, I won't have enough money? Money comes anyways, right? Like, if you're doing the right things, money comes anyways. So, like, what is the reason? Is it greed? So it doesn't really make sense. Right now, the biggest problem we have, in my opinion, is that housing is not accessible and affordable, principally for family formation. That's the problem I see that is greatest in Ontario, maybe Canada.
I think I would agree for sure. I think there's a lot of people that would agree. And the family formation part is something that is often left out of the conversation. And I think it's probably one of the most essential parts of the conversation. It's too bad it's being overlooked, because if we don't have places for family formation, and then we have less people, and you're seeing it with, the feedback from younger people, there's concern because of costs. They're not sure if they can do it, or,
but they just wait. They have to save. Every time they have to save, their probability of family formation goes down.
Yeah, and if we don't have the family formations as a society and as a community, and as not just as a society as a whole, but individual communities, it changes the landscape of what we're used to and the makeup of our communities.
It's existential.
It becomes a problem. Like, it really, really does. So we have people in the office here that are like, we're thinking about having a kid, but it's just like, I don't know, we have to think about this. And I'm like, I just didn't realize, as the costs have gone up. I had my kids before, and the cost of, I would love to know the new numbers, actually, because I have no idea. But when you have a kid, there's a lot of money outflowing. You're just like, holy crap, how does this little thing need all this crap, right? But I didn't really kind of think about that stuff. You just made it work. But that now the costs are so high, you have to think about those things, or at least they feel like they have.
Well, whether you're married or single, everybody's deferring. And so they're missing a natural window, because essentially we're inefficient and unorganized. And there's all these interests that don't really put it all together. At the end of the day, we have to make housing, let's say for young people, we have to put housing back in their visible line of sight.
Yeah.
And so, what would be an option financially to start a family at 25 to 30, is potentially move back to 35. And then if you miss that window, whatever that window may be, like biologically or whatever the case may be, we're going down from 3 kids to 2 to 1. And obviously everybody can track the numbers.
We had our second kid. My wife was 35, and the doctor made her feel like she was quite old to be having a kid.
Right.
She's just like, hey, you're like at the tail end of the window. And there's a lot more options for people in science and things like that than there was in the past. So I think maybe the doctor might have taken it a bit too extreme with her age there. But there was a time when 35 really was like kind of approaching the tail end of things.
Look, my mom had my brother at 38, my youngest sibling, and I get it. And I'm not the youngest person in most rooms now, but I just don't want it to be for financial reasons. Like, I know the cost of wood. I know the cost of drywall. I know the cost of and then I see the end cost that these people have to pay. And, I know there's a lot of focus on, HST and developmental fees and all that kind of stuff, but really there's inefficiencies in every area of construction. There's the government for sure could do better, but so could we in construction. And so if we can oversupply, if we can work together to oversupply, that can only lead in the long run to a net social good. We can make room for more immigrants that can come here and actually be able to afford their house. This society is built on immigrants. So, people can attain it. Our young people can get into the type of housing that they deserve. So really, along all party lines, we can all come together on certain things. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to go and get your mortgage approved based on, 40% ratios, 35, 45, whatever the case may be, after taxes, it's 2/3 of your income. So if we can drive that to fit more and more people and for them to be able to grow into these homes, I don't know, maybe I'm...
No, it makes sense. Like, look, I look back on along these lines and like the makeup of how things have transitioned over time. And I'm like, there was a period of time where, I don't know if it was the majority, but a lot higher number of households had a sole income earner.
For sure.
And that was very different. And I think one of the reasons that things are changing now, maybe people are putting off having kids, is because maybe by choice, maybe by necessity, there needs to be two income earners to live the lifestyle that people want. And then because of that, then if you're in the middle of building your career and this primarily would fall on females, obviously, because they're doing, all the work, basically having the kids.
And that would be the second job that didn't exist before.
Exactly. And they're sacrificing their career path and things than to have kids, because it's a big gap. Because if you if you're pregnant for a period of time, then you have a kid, and if you take some time off, then to take care of the kid, which is great. I think, it's wonderful. You should be doing it, if you're able to. And, but then that gives you this big gap. So like if people get driven by this, if they start down that career path, and it forces them to go down a different path too. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I just think there's a number of people that have been forced into that more than there was in the past because of these affordability issues. So I know that was what we were talking on before. It kind of
I think
things.
Just to add to that, I think that look, double working households, two working households. That's the way I grew up. That's fine. It's already been priced into real estate. If you're talking about affordability,
yeah, right.
So that's fine. What personally bothers me is that, knowing the cost of materials, knowing what labor can be, knowing the efficiencies we can have, looking across the border, right, and seeing that, seemingly the same looking house is, obviously exchange rate aside, is a third of the price, half the price, and thinking through like, we have all the raw materials. We have all the expertise here. Like, can we just get ourselves together here on all sides?
You mean as a country, we actually have the
we have everything
materials.
We need. We have we have the most amazing trades. Like we've built off the wartime bungalow these unbelievable subdivisions. I know when I was servicing basements, and you go to the person's house and they're like, "Look what the builder did." Trust me, if that was a custom home, you had to GC it, general contractor, project manage it yourself. It would have been horrific. Yeah. Right? You go into a house, typical subdivision, let's say if we didn't do the basement, and you go to their house on the upstairs, you're like, okay, you go down to their basements and the bulkheads are all over the place, and the vanity's leaking, and it was built after. So at the end of the day, there's a lot of great people in this market. There's unbelievable experience. I've met a lot of these people, the baby boomers that really built our subdivisions, the subtrades, not the names that everybody's familiar with, but the behind the scenes. Honestly, some of the most impressive people I've met, and I've met a lot of people.
Are there new people coming in to replace? Because a lot of those trades are like of older generations, or a lot of them are getting older. Are you seeing new people come in to replace them of the same quality at the same frequency as some of the older ones are leaving?
So with respect to like sourcing the labor, now that we're dealing with much larger trades, I don't really get exposed to that. Okay. What I do know is that given our current market right now, what people don't realize is that a lot of the track builders trades, like subdivision builders trades, they're sitting at home.
Yeah.
I mean, we built 20, 30,000 homes a year, built proficiencies and systems, and then we just stopped. Right. And I think that, we do definitely have, a trade shortage in different disciplines, but that's a problem we want to work towards, right? We want to create more jobs in the first place. And if you spoke to the trades and saw how many of them are at home today, they're nowhere near optimized. That's a product of us tripping on ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so what is interesting is, they say you never want to waste a good crisis. And what is interesting is that maybe we can change the way we build, right? So going into that, going into the systems that I'm familiar with, on our very first build of our very first multiplex, I wanted to build them out of panels. And so what that means is that the walls already come in pre-framed. And so that obviously expedites your build in theory, but also systemizes and standardizes the quality of it. As long as you got good trades and make sure it's square, it's also much safer. One of the things I learned in building new and building bigger and new is how dangerous a work site can be. And how, just framing a house, if you think about it, it's really, obviously you can injure yourself, but you could be tied off and whatever, but you're not always tied off. You're going up to the next level. One of our sites, the roofer was on the roof and then his tool fell out of his hand. It went right through the roof, right through the plywood. So there's major danger these people take on every single day. There's a reason they have a helmet and steel-toe boots. So when you're doing panels, as an example, you get a safety, you get standardization, and often you don't get a cost savings at least for a while. So you have to believe that in the long run you'll have a cost savings.
So you mean after you've been through multiple iterations of using the panels, then you can get the efficiencies and get the cost savings.
You might have the scale to buy more effectively from your panel operator. Also, imagine just putting into context, you buy IKEA furniture. Let's say you buy two dressers, two drawer bases. The first one you build takes 3 hours. At least that's what it would take me. And then the second one I build would take an hour.
Yeah.
Literally. Yeah. And if I had to build it just myself on a table that I would eventually carpet and figure out, it'd be 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So the investment, especially if you have, a dozen people on the floor building out the house, the investment is in the long run to inevitably approach the same price, the most efficient price of stick framing, and then you get the benefit of time.
Yeah, got it. That makes sense. I feel like I've built 100 of those IKEA bookshelves. Those thick IKEA bookshelves.
Sure. You read a lot?
The little, well, I don't know. I think just over time at our first house, maybe as some of the student properties,
for sure,
put them in things. I think our kids' bedrooms each have one. But I know where the little wood peg goes. I know the screw goes in. Then you put the little metal thing in, turn it to tighten it.
Exactly.
I'm like, yeah, I can do this like the back of my hand now.
Exactly.
Everything else in IKEA will still tick me off, but I mean that one I got.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, so what's you've done some of these properties? So Hamilton, North York.
Yeah, right now I'm focused in Toronto principally.
Okay, and then your goal for this. So now it's time for you. Now that you've done some of these, you've learned some processes. It's not learned some. You've created some processes, carried over some of the experience from the basements.
Right.
Your goal with these is to do, because it's a pretty lofty goal. And if you weren't doing 300 basements a year in the past, I would think maybe might be excessive. But
right.
I'm not gonna doubt you. That's for sure.
Well, I prefer people doubt it.
Yeah, at the competitive side.
Exactly.
Right. I'll prove you wrong.
I have a couple stories like that, but especially when you're dealing with incumbents, like people that built these tract homes, they don't understand our timelines. So there's a few things that I look at. So for one, we build multiplexes, family formation homes on individual infill sites. My strategy is to build one a week, right? So our sites now, because the basements are also finished, right? So I still get my kick out of finishing.
So these are new, but these are new. These are from scratch. You're buying an old lot, like a lot with a property on it.
Yeah, wartime bungalow.
On it, and you're ripping that down.
Correct.
Okay.
And so we would, right now, what we're finishing up spring, this spring is 7,300 square feet. Finished, including the basements, including the garden homes in the backyard. And we have a new iteration of a design that's coming out for late spring, early summer. That's the main structure is over 10,000 square feet. So it's not even part 9 anymore. So the general building code, it's part 3, small buildings. And so the main building is over 10,000 square feet with the basement, and the garden home is 2 stories plus a basement. So it's close to 2,000 square feet in Toronto.
2 units in the garden or one?
Just one.
Just one. So how many units is that in total then?
Still 5.
It's still 5, okay.
But the idea would be, and they're rentals for now, but the idea is it's a lot of occupiable space, so families can grow and so on and so forth. But yeah, right now we are kind of on track to be doing one of these projects every 2 weeks, so bi-weekly. And we want to pivot that into weekly, as long as there's a market for it.
But even every 2 weeks to pump these things through these things, you have multiple trades on there every day going at things. They're not tripping over. They can't.
It's actually the opposite. So there's kind of like a critical volume that you want to be able to use the subdivision trades concept. Like you build a subdivision, it's 300 homes. You build that in a year. That's nothing to Mattamy and Green Park and whoever else. So if you get into the level where you interest the largest trades, you're not big enough for them. So the quicker we get to volume, the more consistent we can get in our trades. But the thing is, so there's two aspects. Remember, there's the office and there's the field. So when you panelize and when you build systems and you try to get to the biggest trades that are used to getting in and out, now it's just a matter of feeding them enough work. Now, the other part of it is, as I mentioned before, the architects, the engineers, the designers, they don't communicate. And there's a lot of lost time. And then, when the mechanical, to give you an example, when you're doing a return duct or a supply line and it affects your structural beam and whatever, like you said, like some trades will rip something out. You have to think it through, even if you don't get the benefit of using BIM with 3D modeling. You have to think through every element of it. So it's not enough to have a great architect and a great mechanical engineer. So what I learned in the last 2.5 years is that I needed to know everything.
So you're the people you're the person that can piece it, because I found in a lot of different spaces, like the architect might think like an architect.
Correct.
The engineer will think like an engineer, but you need someone sometimes to bridge the gap, because to kind of almost speak a little bit of both languages, than to make them work together. Does that make sense in what I'm saying?
Yeah, but in my real world, real lived experience, it's one step further. You have to become them.
Okay. So more knowledge, a little bit more in-depth knowledge than I'm thinking.
More than more. Yeah. What I'm saying is I had to really know how to navigate the building code in Part 9. I had to know how to do my own mechanical drawings. I needed to know how to do my own mechanical calculations, electrical calculations. I pretty much memorized all the span tables. I know all the limiting distances. I know how to design my own grading. So you basically learn every time you hire a professional, you try to understand what they do and why, because that'll navigate over. So right now I'm able to expand on the building envelope because I understand how to play with the grading, and I understand the limiting distances and how it affects the layouts, because I've built so many basements. I've designed 10,000 suites really, or been a part of it. All this standard room sizes and everything else and functionality I already know. So I built off of that. And then when you go to the trades, we had our own electrical department. We have all these things. So I can speak the language with these people. And when we run standard Gantt schedules and we have commitments in our agreements, we're able to hit timelines that just don't sound real. Mm-hmm. So as an example, you're building 7,300 or 12,000 square feet. It's very common for that to take a year, right? And so currently, as we're navigating and shortening our timelines consistently, we could do that in 2 months. And my goal is to be able to do a foundation with all the infrastructure in about 2 weeks and frame and build it in 4 to 6 weeks. So total. And then it's at occupancy is what I'm referring to.
Look, I don't know, if you that goal, you end up achieving that goal or not. It sounds, compared to the timelines I'm used to, it definitely sounds aggressive. But even if you don't get it to that point, just with what you're doing and the types of spaces you're building, for the part of the population that needs them, it's commendable, man. It really is, because you're providing a solution. Like, there's an obvious problem, and we need more people like you. Like, you're providing the solution, and whether it gets down to a solution that can turn over as fast as you can turn it over, or if it does take a little bit longer, there's just some stuff being done, which is really cool. And I think it's just really cool, and it's obvious that's why the success is coming. And it's nice you can use your past experience to kind of do this type of stuff. It'll be really interesting to see at the speed at which you go to morph your kind of your own processes and how you like to build out stuff. It'll be really interesting to see what you're doing in 2, 3, 5 years. I won't even say 10 years, because from now to 5 years, there's it could get really interesting, especially with what's changing around here, because they're being more focused put on this area. Hey, we need more people like you. And if there's a standardization starts happening and things can pick up speed that way, it gets really interesting really quick.
Yeah. I mean, my view is every year is a decade, right? So, if it's normally supposed to take a decade to progress your business, and why not do it in a year, right? So, or a month is a year. And so I still tend to work on obscure times when we need to. But, for me, I think that if we could just focus on producing more housing, more square footage, put it out there, kind of put your ear to the ground and understand what potentially people can utilize best. Like I see a lot of the subdivisions and infills, like reducing these backyards down to like balconies over the garage. That must be some type of agreement that where clients are okay with not having a backyard. I remember living in a subdivision and nobody went to their backyard at that point.
Yeah.
Not like when I grew up. So, I'm looking, and so rooftop terraces make a little more sense, maybe. And so we're producing these products, as long as we can produce them efficiently, it reduces the cost, they'll be occupied. Hopefully we can be a small part of solving the housing crisis.
I think you'll get anything that you need. You just need a few people to line up and tell you you're full of shit, you can't get it done. And then I think it's like, yeah, okay. And that just automatically...
I can tell you a quick story about that.
Sure. If there's one to share, share it.
So our trim carpentry supplier, so they used to just supply us the trim. So the doors, the trim, the baseboards, whatever.
This is in the basement, basement days? Okay.
Yeah, so they would deliver it because our jobs are too small for them to do physically. But the real business for the subdivision builders is to do supply and install. That's like that's the language in subdivision. So now that we're big enough, they do supply and install. I met with the two owners. I know one because he's operational, and I worked with him regularly in the basements. And I met with the two owners, and I told them where my ambition was. And then we talked numbers, and I was like, this is going to get to this many units. They go, well, that's like some of the biggest builders. And then I said, this is the number I want to hit. And they go, that's mad at me. And they both blew up laughing. And they were just laughing. And I was stoic. And that's not usually me. So I'm just stoic. And I'm looking at these, baby boomers. And I'm looking at them both. And I'm stoic. And I look at the one that I know and the one that I met, who's the big boss that day. And I said, just do me a favor. I said, what is it? Just don't forget you laughed. So what I do now is every 6 months, as my volume is picking up, the one that I've known for a decade, I just text them. I'm like, is there anything funny today? And that's the way I convince myself that there's somebody counterbalancing my vision.
You know what? And it's totally, I get that sense from you. It's like, it's if you set your mind to like, if something, it's not even if you set your mind to something, it's got to be something that you really want or something that ticks you off. Like if you feel, and I think maybe I'm relating it to myself because for me, is if I feel that there is something that I can do or I should be able to do, whether it's physically, like whatever it is, it's like, well, no, like now I'm so determined to do that because it's not that like I want to even prove a point to anyone. It's like, I think I should be able to do this. Right. So I want to go and do it.
Well, I just think my view is that it's going to help people. I think there's people that are not going to know that I exist, which is great. They're not going to, nothing to do with any vanity or anything. But I know that it's going to be there. Another example of that was actually yesterday. I was on a call with a kitchen supplier that does like the biggest builders and whatever. So just being in the room with them was cool. And the older, he's in his 70s or even 80s, this older Italian man goes to me and says, that's with his accent, he's like, that's impossible, whatever the case may be. So, and then the person that called the meeting on my behalf said, trying to like, she's new in my operation, so she thinks I'm going to be offended or something by a naysayer. And I said, and I'm like, firstly, I wanted to make sure they both understood, the vendor understood that I was grateful for the meeting. I really am. Like, I'm so honored to be in the conversation with the people that built the city.
God, yeah.
It's so crazy. So that's first. So I made sure they knew that, right? And then I said to him, look, if I'm able to achieve these timelines with the strategy that I have, I showed him how I can mitigate all his concerns. My kitchens have no corners. I design appliances that have slack, not just fillers. So there's different things that I can do to make sure that we can standardize the measurements without having to have a measure date. So when I explained all that, I said to him, look, if I get it to go, right, you take me out for dinner, your favorite restaurant. So he got excited. He says, yeah. So then we went through another, 15 minutes later, we went through another, conversation. He goes, it's impossible that drywallers take this long and that long, because he really knows the gap in timelines between measuring at framing with the utilities there, drywall or not, and then how long it takes for them to come back with cabinets. So it's not uncommon for them to take 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, because they got the time anyways. Where I'm like, you ain't got that time with me. So he goes back to, it doesn't happen that way. It's a good idea, but it doesn't happen that way. You know what I told him? I said, I like my steak medium rare. And then he laughed like that. That's kind of my theme. I'm trying to make it fun.
Hey, you know what? A guy like that, I think
you have to inspire them.
Yeah, I think he's rooting for you.
Exactly.
I think he leaves that and he's like, that fucking guy,
Is different.
I was going to say he's a little bit crazy.
That's right.
But you know what? I want to see if he can get it done.
Well, that guy was crazy himself 50 years ago when he started.
Exactly. I think he's rooting for you. He's had his success in
100%.
and he's done it, and he's like, he probably never thought about doing it that way. He's
right.
Want to see if it can be done. He might. He's not doubting you in a bad way.
Of course not.
He's like rooting for you. He just thinks it's impossible.
And similarly, I'm rooting for the next young couple that gets the house.
Yeah.
You know, that's how I see it.
For sure. Anyone that does things differently. I was talking to someone else in a different business that they're like, hey, look, we're going to do it like this. It hasn't been done this way. I'm like, it's so cool. Try it. Like, it's awesome. Like we can't just do things the same way we've always been doing them. It doesn't it comes to a point. We've changed so much in our lives. We changed the way we shop. We changed the way we bank. We do so many things differently. But there's people driving around. Their cars are driving them. They're
Correct.
The Tesla drivers, the cars are driving for them. But yet in so much of what we do, it just stays the same, and we refuse to change it or look at different ways to do it. And every time someone looks at a different way, it's like, oh, that's crazy. That's not how it's done. And I'm like, well, I mean, maybe that's not how it's done, but why can't it be done that way?
Well, think about it this way. Typically in development, one of the biggest constraints is raising capital. Right. Do you have time or?
Yeah, no, I'm looking. We've gone long, but yeah, no, go ahead.
It's up to you.
Go ahead. I'm not trying to cut you off.
No.
Just glance at the time.
No, we're good. So typically in development, you got to raise capital to buy the land, to build this, that, the other, whatever. The benefit of running a business for as long as I did is I had just enough money, including selling that house in Vaughan, to get started.
Yeah.
You need millions of dollars. So I had just enough to get started. But I know with all the different iterations in design and all the small changes and relatively large changes in course, like you go from accessible to retrofitting to new to bigger new, like if you're an investor, you're like, get the dumb permit in. What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Just give me a return on my investment. So if I raised a GPLP or any of those other types of funds, and you see joint ventures, and it works for other types of projects, but doesn't work when you're working through like an innovative based business.
It's different because you don't know that you can't use the returns from the past to model,
and there's no guarantee.
Yeah. What about but your model right now is the ones you've done so far, you're holding on to and
Correct.
You're renting out.
Correct.
And then in the future, the goal is to then sell these off to
whatever
end users.
Well, no. So there will be builds that are specifically built for sale for end users.
Okay.
In fact, that would be my preference.
Okay.
Because I feel like if I could, the person, just like when we came here,
an affordable ownership,
just like 30 years, 40 years, 20 years, whatever, pay off your mortgage, you're in your retirement years, you have the asset, you have the same confidence that all the baby boomers do.
Yeah.
Away you go. Right? It's hard to save money. If you're renting and it's 20% less, my fear is that when they're seniors, they're still not going to have any kind of equity or assets to leverage. Mm-hmm. So if it was my decision, I would build them for sale. I would allow them to buy it. They could leverage whatever CMHC is the next insurance product that's out there. But right now, it just makes more sense to be building them as rentals. But again, if we get our cost of construction down, we can build lots of square footage. We can move with the market.
There's also a proof of concept here. It's almost
Correct.
like when a franchise is built out, you know how they need a few corporate stores to just prove the model and prove that it's a repeatable model.
Correct.
And before they can go then franchise it, it's almost you're almost in like that stage where you're building out these corporate stores.
Correct.
And then you eventually get to a point you're like, okay, the model is complete. Like the model is now ready to then move on to that next stage.
Exactly.
It's matured to that next stage, right?
I'm already designing 6-story wood buildings. Like I'm already working through all those parameters for different use cases. So yeah, you can't lose. Like you just keep working, keep learning, and understanding the market. Like I said, for example, let's say I want to build for sale. Well, firstly, I'd have to be a spec builder. So I'd have to literally take all the risk of the buy, build it, put it on MLS, hope for the best. But the subdivision builders got the benefit of pre-sales. So if you're looking at it from an objective perspective, it's too risky to spec build in this market. Mm-hmm. You're adding HST, you're adding this, you paid line transfer. There's probably not a margin. Otherwise, more spec builders would be building. So I think there's just a time and place. And so we just focus in our lane, producing efficient homes, building them quickly, building them to high standard of quality. These are super high standard. They're all spray foamed walls, what's called a hot roof. They're highly energy efficient. They have like an air exchange for, if you're familiar with that, under one. So these things are all run on heat pumps. There's no gas in that sense other than the stoves and the water tank. So there's a lot of efficiencies in the design that kind of is the future of homes, while building them quickly and making sure that they're built to a high standard and affordable as can be.
It's cool talking to you, man. It's obvious that there's passion behind this. This isn't a small little project. Hey, I think I can make a buck here. There's a way bigger thing going on, which is really cool. So for people that want to check it out, it's just the best place is penguinliving.com.
Yeah, penguinliving.com is the current brand. It's currently actually our accessible brand. We'll have a new brand coming out. When is this podcast coming out?
Probably in the next couple of weeks. The team handles all that stuff. We do them and they're like, okay guys, you do it.
Yeah, it'll be called Sigma Developments. So that's kind of...
And that's what, so is that coming out in May?
Probably around May, yeah.
Yeah, so we would be into that. So right at the same time. Sigma's Z-I-G-M-A. Sigma Development.
Yeah, that's the strategy. So it's a play on Sigma. So everything's mathematically modeled. And then, in terms of Z, I feel like we're building this for Generation Z.
No,
Z.
very cool.
And also with Alpha coming behind.
Of course, there's thought behind it for you. Yeah.
Well, I just think that okay, let's turn the page on how construction's done. I didn't invent panels. I didn't invent operational efficiency. But if we could put it all together, we can hand over the future of building.
Yeah.
These houses only last, 100, 200 years. You're going to have to rebuild them anyways. So but we can create a new manufacturing standard to the way houses are built, homes are built. Maybe that's what we want to hand off to the next generation.
Yeah. Very cool, man. Congrats on everything so far. I know it's just like the beginning of this path, but congrats. It's exciting to see kind of where you're going. And whatever. Yeah. However we can be part of it, let us know.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Thank you very much.